you. Okay, thanks. All right, it's 7 o'clock, so I'm going to call us to order and ask everyone to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good evening, everybody. We are taking our first look at the 2024-25 proposed budget. Charles, would you like to give an introduction?
Of course. All right, so I provided you all a copy on paper, so you can take notes on it. Otherwise, it's the same as up here. We've already made one slight change to the budget, which I'll go over with you tonight.
Hey, Charles, sorry, not to interrupt you. Our agenda calls for any introductory remarks and then public comment ahead of when you dig into it. So was there any...
No.
Is there anything that you wish to say at this point in time before we...
I don't know.
Okay, then I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but is there any public comment at this point in time? Yeah, give it a second, that's fine. Sorry, yeah.
You can also mention there will be a second audience of citizens after my presentation, so if anybody wants to wait until after the budget is presented and then comment, they're welcome to do that.
Perfect.
My question, just quickly, is can Tricia see the chat tokens? Who's in on Zoom?
See the chat.
I'm on the chat.
Okay, great. Then we're going to proceed, and there is, as Charles mentioned, there is a second public comment opportunity later. Charles, we're going to dive into the review and discussion of the 2024-25 Superintendent of Schools proposed budget. Take it away.
Thank you. All right, so I provided you a hard copy. You're welcome to take notes on it. It's the same as I'm going to present up here. We also have a lot of folks on Zoom tonight. We're going to unmute Stephanie, and she may choose to chime in if there are any questions come up during the presentation or if I misspeak. So Stephanie, please feel free to chime in and correct us. We also have all of the administrators online. Thank you for letting them be home tonight. It's going to be a wild weather evening, so those people who have to drive away, so I'm glad they're home safe. But otherwise, they're here, and we can ask questions of any of the principals or Dawn or Eric, and I see Bob is here, if there are any questions that come up in the course of the presentation. All right, so just a couple of things. I'm going to give you, I think one of the things I've heard from board members in the past is that you're looking for more information, right? And I've done my best to, answer questions specifically about the budget, but I brought a couple of artifacts I want to point out to you. So you see all of these giant binders here? Those are the backup worksheets for every nickel that we spend in the district, right? I bring those just to give you a sense. Those are by building and department. There's an awful lot of detail that goes into the budget. You're certainly welcome to take a look at it. It's everything from like Post-it notes at WB Mason to software subscriptions. I mean, everything is well documented. Our principals and their administrative assistants and Stephanie do an amazing job, making sure that we're out soliciting bids and finding the best prices, and all of those worksheets there provide a very detailed overview. In my humble opinion, that's too much information. Right? I don't think you as a board want to necessarily spend an evening combing through every worksheet with every Post-it note that we're looking at. That said, I believe in complete transparency. They're there. I can provide them to you electronically. I don't think I want to make that many copies, but if you ever had any questions specifically about what it is that we're purchasing or from where or how much it costs, including shipping or anything else, that's all laid out. So I brought those just to illustrate, that's the kind of detail we certainly could provide. I know that, when you look at the book that we handed out to you, it's a little thin. You could certainly give a giant book like this, but I'm hoping to meet you somewhere in the middle in terms of making sure that you have all of the information you need to process what I'm going to present to you tonight. But otherwise, I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information, and it would be nice to save a few trees and not make that many copies for everybody of that giant book, although we could provide it to you electronically. So let me go through the budget, and again, I'll encourage you to ask me questions as I go through. There will be a time for a Q&A at the end, and as a reminder, we have a second workshop scheduled for this Thursday. So tonight might be a good night to present, answer some initial questions, give you some time to think about it, and then be back here either Thursday or next Tuesday for our regular meeting to answer more questions or follow up on anything that might need more clarification or detail tonight. So Dylan, can we go forward one slide, please? All right, so I want to start here. This is going to be a very complicated budget year, right? And some of these things we anticipated and actually had begun planning for even last year. Some of these things are surprises, right? These are what I'm calling the budget drivers. These are the things that are going to directly affect or impact what I'm presenting to you tonight. And they include the following. I want to go through these and make sure you understand what's influencing the budget in a pretty significant way. The first is, as you know, the COVID relief funding that we received. This is what many districts have been referring to as the cliff. I think we've referred to it as a cliff a few times in here. This is expiring at the end of this year. We still will be able to use federal COVID relief funding to run our summer programs, summer learning loss programs this summer. But as of September 1, those funds expire. So right now, our current budget is supplemented with $247,000 in that federal COVID relief funding that is going to expire at the end of this year. Dave.
I'm not trying to jump in, but starting down the path that concerns me is that we have one page in here on funding, but we have 27 pages on spending, and now you start right off the bat talking about funding. So that's where there's this big disconnect. We talk about spending, and some things we talk about funding. Now you got down here new student support services, but you don't talk anything about additional funding. We know we get 70 or 80%.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that.
I'll give you a sneak preview. If you jump.
All right, I'm just saying, maybe you're going to cover that, but I want to make sure that was going to be part of it. Is that the confusing part?
So if you want to take a peek ahead, the last 4 slides, I think I have titled Revenue, including that as part of the superintendent's budget, and revenue from state and federal grants. So we're definitely going to spend tonight talking about expenses, revenues, which we call grants. And then, of course, at the end, I do want to spend a little bit of time unpacking a very complicated part of the budget that has to do with the excess cost. So I definitely heard that request. We're gonna land tonight with revenue sources and excess costs so that you can see how that factors in. Certainly, this $247,000 in last year's budget presentation was a revenue source. It was something that we received as part of federal pandemic relief funding, and we included in this year's budget to help, pay for people services and things related to learning loss and student mental health. The second revenue source that is decreasing next year is $200,000 from the school improvement grant. So 4 years ago, we started receiving $350,000 a year, and if you'll remember, we were promised $350,000 a year for 4 years. Over the summer, we received some difficult news from the State Department of Education. Without any warning, they reduced that by $200,000. This year, the budget is supplemented with $150,000. Next year, you'll see as a revenue source, we are anticipating an additional $150,000 for the last year of that school improvement grant. So both of those amounts are, as revenue sources, are here in this year's budget, but are not going to be a part of revenues for next year's budget. And I I think you're aware of those from some of the layoffs we had to do this summer and other conversations we've had. Okay. This is a shocker, right? So we use an insurance consultant. She met with us and recommended, based on usage and large cap claims in our insurance, that we plan for a 12% increase in insurance. Pretty shocking. We are going back out to bid, right? So Ryan and I and Stephanie and Tom met with the insurance consultant. We recognize that that number is shockingly large. We're going back out to bid. Those bids should come back in February. I'm hoping that it's less than 12%. I'm sort of praying that it's less than 12%. But the insurance consultant's initial recommendation was to include a 12% increase for health insurance. Again, that's a shockingly high number. That would be a $411,000 increase over this year's budget.
Charles, did I see in the binder that if we were to stay with our current plan with Cigna, that it was they were talking about a 19% increase? So this 12% that's been recommended to us by our consultant is significantly lower than what we've been quoted.
Right. It's what she believes she can twist Cigna's arm and get us to.
Okay.
But she's definitely recommended go back out.
Go back out to bid, and there's a possibility that we could come in slightly under 12, possibly under 12%, maybe.
She said she's very confident in 12% as a number. You'll see when I get to it, I've reduced it even a little bit more.
Right.
But even that I'm nervous about.
Okay. Yeah.
This is one of those things that we won't know until February. Hopefully it'll come in later.
So what, because I see the number I see in here for benefits increase is 6.59.
That's a good
What
question.
do we actually apply in this budget?
It
for
would be
increase?
10% if
I
I
know it
didn't.
would be if,
Right, if, you'll see, I reduced it to 10. It would be 10%, but we haven't gotten to that part of the presentation where I talk about
but so
reductions in
10%
force.
is what you used for a figure
Correct.
for here.
10% is what I use. You'll see that as part of the reductions. It's down to 6.8 because my superintendent's budget also includes the staff reductions that we're going to get to tonight. Does that make sense?
Right, oh, I remember reading that, yeah, because there's less people, there's going to be lower.
Significantly fewer people. Yeah. Okay. You know, we're heading into the last year of a 3-year contract with all of our bargaining units. I have reached out to 3 of our bargaining units who have said they're interested in a 1-year extension. By the way, I'm working with Rebecca on that. The Personnel Committee is very much engaged in that. We're hoping to get back on a 3-by-3 schedule, but it's the 3rd year of the contract for all of our bargaining units. General wage and step increases would be $503,000. Again, that's if we kept everybody this year and rolled them over into next year. New student support service expenses. Dawn came and asked for $946,000 increase. That's not what I'm proposing. You're going to hear I cut back on some of that. But I need to remind all of us, last year was scary when I came and said we had a $350,000 deficit related to student support services. And if you remember this year, I told you, Stephanie reported, that we're also in a deficit. That's there, right? This makes up for that. We need to be aware that we're running a deficit. Even this year, Stephanie mentioned at our last meeting that we whittled it down to 40, but that number's still a moving target based on new and emerging student needs and services. So this number included our needs for this year, and Dawn recommended that we include some funding, which I've removed, for unanticipated outplacement costs. I'll get to that part in the presentation shortly, but these are all things that where we started the process, people asked for. The insurance consultant asked for a 12% placeholder. Dawn asked for $946,000. We know that that's the amount from our contracts. That would be if we kept everybody from this year into next year, and we know that those 2 funding revenue sources from the federal government and state government are going away for next year. So where Stephanie and I began is, if you add all of these up, that would be $2,307,000. Here's our current budget. The budget drivers alone would increase this year's budget to next year's budget by 9.8%. Next slide, please, Bill. Okay. That's where we started the picture, and then Stephanie and I began the process of engaging the principals and Bob and Eric in discussions about what their building and programming needs would be. Now, the principals bring me a lot of really good ideas, but I don't really put a lot of constraints on them. I want to hear all the ideas. It's important for me to hear what their needs are and what they're looking at. If I included all of their requests and the budget drivers, we would have been at a 12.71% increase. If I included the things they wanted and that factored into the budget drivers. Bill, next slide. Clearly, I understand, and the building understand, the whole leadership team understands that a 12.71% increase would be completely unrealistic in this economic plan. So I wouldn't even consider bringing a 12.71 budget forward, though it does reflect reasonable needs and requests. So we began the process of reducing from those requests and factoring in the budget drivers. Let me stop there and see if there are any questions so far. Okay. First things I removed from the requests, and I just want to go through these because these are important requests, and they're things that we could certainly use, but again, we have to make cuts. We have to be reasonable in terms of what our expenses are going to be. As you know, we're using one librarian to run both the high school and middle school library. That's been the way it's been for at least as long as I've been here, probably an awful lot longer. Chuck Hirschon did bring forward a request and asked for another library media specialist so we could have one for the middle school, one for the high school. Unfortunately, at this point, I can't support that request, so we removed it from Chuck's request. Chuck also asked for a .5 math interventionist. We currently have a .5 math interventionist that's being funded out of Title IV money. Chuck asked for 0.5 so we could bring that person up to full-time, with half of that position funded by the local education agency and half of it funded through federal grants. Told Chuck that I certainly value math intervention at the middle school. It's something we need, but unfortunately not something I can support this year. He understands that. We will still have a part-time math interventionist at the middle school that will be funded out of the revenue sources involving federal grants that I will be at the end of this presentation. And Eric, again, asked for an administrative assistant to help out both with curriculum instruction and technology, and the idea would be that would be a shared resource with athletics. Again, not something I can support this year based on where we've started the budget process. So I made these initial cuts. These aren't positions we have now. These would be added into the budget, but I've pulled them back. That got us from 12.71 to 12.11. Next slide, please. Again, we all recognize that 12.11% increase would be absolutely not a good starting place. It's not something that would be comfortable bringing forward to you, to begin this process. So we made some reductions. We've reduced a kindergarten section. These are teachers: a kindergarten teacher, a first grade teacher, a third grade. A third grade teacher, and I'm going to show you in a few moments that these reductions can be made as a function of student enrollment and not increased class size. So bear with me on that. And to be completely honest, these reductions were ones I had my eye on right along. These were the ones that were going to help us, I believe, parachute off the cliff. Right? And I'll review where those reductions are coming from and what they're going to do to class size shortly. We have one in there as TBD. Again, that would be something that we'd be considering as we see student enrollment for next year, particularly our kindergarten enrollment. We don't know what the effect of the policy that is up for a second read at next board meeting's going to do to the kindergarten enrollment. I project we're going to have a smaller kindergarten class next year than we do this year. We may only need 4 sections of kindergarten. That's why I put that in there as a TBD for now. We're going to reduce 1 FTE out of physical education. That is a combination of a 0.5 position out of Valley View, again, sensitive to these reductions in student enrollment, and a 0.5 position here at the high school out of health, again, reflection of student enrollment. We're going to pull back .6 FTE of world language. As you know, we do have right now .6 in the current budget, which is actually helping us with our deficit, which is a .6 FTE French teacher. We were unable to find a .6 French teacher because it is a certification area that's a shortage area. We're not going to find that, so we're going to be creative and we're going to not have that .6 position in the high school budget for next year. And as you know, our carpenter recently retired. We're not filling that position this year, and I'm not recommending we fill that position next year and reap the savings from that. So out of this second round of reductions, I'm recommending to you that we cut 5.6 certified teaching positions and 1 classified teaching. These are classroom teachers, and you see them listed here, and the classified is the carpenter. That got us from 12.11 to 10.67. Next slide, please.
Charles, can I ask quickly, the .5 FTE PE at Valley View, reducing that to a half-time position, are you still able to ensure that every Valley View class will get 2 PE days a
Yeah.
week, or are you anticipating a change?
We're going to keep that. So what we're going to be doing is sharing 2.5 FTE PE teachers between Valley View, Gildersleeve, and Brownstone. And we're going to be able to do that because what you'll see shortly, because of the, go back one slide, please. We are going to have fewer classes to cover. That's
Right.
3 fewer classes. So this, for scheduling purposes, the principals have looked at it, worked with Eric, made sure that there's no impact on current programming from these reductions.
Okay, thank you.
The health at the high school will likely mean larger class sizes and potentially our middle school teacher teaching a section of health at the high school. Again, all of this is going to be worked out over the spring as we respond to student requests and take a look at enrollment.
Okay, thank you.
Dave.
On the carpenter, did you say that was unfilled this year?
Greg Archer recently retired.
But then that would be a reduction because we didn't have it this year, we don't have it next year.
We have Greg Archer budgeted in our budget now. We've paid him for the first 5 months of the year. He's retired in January. We're not going to fill it now and reap the savings from that
okay.
position for the rest of this year, and I'm not recommending we carry that position over to next year.
Okay.
What kind of impact do you imagine that will have on our facilities and on our ability to meet needs in our facilities? Are we going to need to contract out? Do we have those skills in our other custodial staff? How is that going to work?
Yeah, Bob's here. I think he'll tell you that he and his team are going to do their best to learn and pick up some of that slack, otherwise it would become a contracted service.
Okay.
You have to wait and see.
Have to wait and see.
I think we talked about that in personnel.
We did talk about that in personnel.
There was a back and forth on
Yep.
just how many projects does a carpenter do that you couldn't make allowance for that and then bring in somebody when was absolutely necessary to have a skilled carpenter.
Exactly. But, what those projects are or what the needs are, I think is sort of to be determined. We're going to have to examine the impact of this reduction as we go into next year and go through next year's budget development process.
Yeah. I think Bob had something to add.
Carpentry, the word carpentry is a little misleading. They're 10% of that job, 15% of that job is actually building stuff out of wood. The major part of it.
Yeah, Bob, do you mind coming up to the podium so that anyone online can hear you also? Thank you.
Just want to kind of explain the title.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's important.
Yep.
Building maintainer. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So, the title carpenter is a little misleading because, you think of a carpenter works with wood all day. So Greg did many other things, and a large percent of the work that he did was doors, locks, fasteners, a lot of that stuff. That's an art that needs to be learned. Although I have a little background with working with him on that, that's something that we're going to have to be concerned with, but we might have to contract a little more of that work out if that happens. So building things is something that he did, but we don't do an awful lot of that. So he did a lot of other work related to other than just carpentry. So he was really a general maintenance, at the higher end of what he did. So services is the biggest thing. He tried to do, whatever basically I gave him until the point where we didn't have the expertise to do it, either Greg himself or me helping him, and we would have to sub it up. So,
Yeah. So I think we should have called that building maintainer as opposed to fund. All right, so after these reductions, again, which is only in the second round here, that brought us to 10.67 from, again, this year's budget and the requests. Bill, next slide. Again, we're realists, completely understand that it's 10.67% is not something I would bring forward as part of my initial round of discussions. Yeah, we knew we had to make additional cuts, so we went into third round of reductions. First reduction is Eric brought forward a request for $324,000. These would be for Chromebook lease and new hardware, desktops, particularly those that have reached an age that they no longer support the latest cybersecurity platform. I've removed it from the LEA, and I'm going to bring it to the capital budget. Right now, we're going to be okay, but not for long. As you know, we have a Chromebook replacement cycle. By doing this, Eric reminded me that we're really just kicking the can on this, and that at some point we're going to need to ask for and get a lease in order to make sure that we have a stable inventory of Chromebooks for our students to use. So this wasn't an easy decision, but at this point, working from a 10.67% increase, I didn't see any other option. So I have taken it out of the LEA and I put it in capital, and we'll talk a little bit about capital tonight. I also removed $100,000 from that $900,000 that Dawn initially asked for. We do this every year. Dawn builds her budget on what our current student needs are, and then she asks for a cushion. She was very honest with that. She said, you'll see a $100,000 cushion in there. Charles, it's really smart to have that in there because, as we have learned this year, sometimes special education goes in your favor and sometimes it doesn't. Students can move into district, or current students can have new needs that might require specialized services or outplacements. She asked for that cushion in her budget as part of that $946,000 that she presented to me. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that. We're going to roll the dice. Dawn's budget right now only reflects current student needs projecting into next year. As you know, and we've talked an awful lot about, special education is one of those budget areas that is a moving line item regularly. It's something that we do our best to project based on current needs, but it's sensitive to a lot of changes throughout the year. So I did remove that placeholder for a ghost out placement that Dawn had recommended we put in there. I also reduced the insurance placeholder from 12% to 10%, right? And Stephanie's probably on there gritting her teeth right now. Stephanie really wanted me to stick with the 12%, stay at what the insurance consultant had recommended, but hey, I wanted to get us to a place that we could at least start the discussions. I did reduce it to 10. We won't find out that number until we open the bids and they come back in February. I'm hoping that's a very good day. It could be more than 10, it could be less than 10. Let's keep our fingers crossed, let our consultant do our work, and see what the bids come back at from the vendors we're going to solicit from. And this was a tough one. I did cut Bob back, took a haircut, about $50,000. These are out of, Buildings and Grounds is well aware of what we need in our facilities. So Bob had several projects identified for us, things that we wanted to get done next year, but we did reduce Bob's budget by $50,000. So if you add all of that up, that moved us from 10.67 down to a 7.79% increase. Bill, next slide. Again, 7.79% still would be not the most realistic place for us to start. So we had to make some additional reductions. Leadership team and I met, we poured back over the requests and the current budget, and we reduced further. I took 15% out of Valley View, Gildersleeve, Brownstone, middle school athletics, and curriculum instruction and technology requests. In a moment, I'm going to share with you what those cuts are, because those weren't the only ones. By reducing 15% from all of these budgets, we reduced $136,000. We're going to reduce 4 paraprofessional positions. Yeah, and this one is one I'm nervous about, and I'm sure if you could see Stephanie's face, she too is shaking her head, and Dawn is shaking her head. We're gonna hope we can find a speech and language pathologist. We're gonna go on the market and hope we can get someone in-house. The difference between what we pay someone and what we have to pay for speech and language as a contracted service is that amount. Right? So I'm rolling the dice here. We're gonna do whatever we can to recruit a speech and language pathologist. If you know any, send them my way. We have a position right now for them. You know, we're part of our deficit now is being driven by our speech and language pathologist. Took a job at Yale Hospital. We have that opening. We're paying for it as a contracted service. I am telling my daughter, become a speech and language pathologist as a career. There are not enough of them out there. We need a speech and language pathologist. Anyone that hears me say that, Portland is a wonderful place to work. I'd love to talk to you. This is another one that's tough. I took out $50,000 for our transition program. Dawn had brought forward a request that we move our transition program out of the schools and rent somewhere in town, right? And we, again, just put a placeholder in it. This would include monthly rental, electricity, internet, and maintaining the site. Unfortunately, we just can't support that this year. We'll see where we go in the future, and you know, if is anybody in town has a place and is looking to donate it or would love to help us house this program, I'm all ears. We're out there looking. But by taking this $50,000 out, what it means we're going to do with the transition program next year is move it from Brownstone to here at the high school. We already have a space picked out for it. We're going to need to keep that program in-house at least for another year until we get to a more friendly budget climate. That brought us from 7.79 to 6.4.
And by, I know we're obligated to move it from where it is to here, so once that happened, we would then be eligible to invite other people from out of town to enroll in that, because now we're in compliance with the state. So that would drive maybe some
revenue,
some benefit. Right, I was hold off on saying revenue.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important, yes, and we're well aware of that, and Dawn has lots of connections with area districts and superintendents who use Middletown and other programs. We may well find ourselves open for business.
Can I ask about the 4 paraprofessional positions?
Yep.
I'm trying to, knowing that we have requests nearly every year to add additional paraprofessional positions in response to student need. I'm wondering how are you going to identify positions? I mean, this is driven by student need. Do we really think that we won't need every single one of those paras next year?
I'm not prepared to say that right now, but whatever we put in the budget is what we're going to have, and we're going to need to figure this out right now. We're going to show you shortly. We still have 51 paras budgeted. That's significant. We are going to need to make sure that we use those resources and deploy them to the needs where they need to be.
I guess what I'm asking is that, when we talk about special education services, it's driven by student need. We budget based on what our current student need is. So in terms of paraprofessional positions, we're not a district that has floating paras. We have paras that are directly mandated by student IEPs.
Yep.
So are we not, by reducing 4 paraprofessionals, are we then not doing what we typically do, which is to budget according to current student need?
Let me get back to you on that. I would love Dawn to answer that question.
Okay.
Certainly, this is a tough one. We're going to make sure when we write an IEP with a student, it is a contract. We understand we're obligated, right? But every year, we go into annual review PPTs and we revisit those IEPs, right? As we go into those annual review PPTs, Dawn will be aware, and the building principals will be aware, because they hear me now, that we are reducing 4 paraprofessionals. That as you design programming for next year, be aware that we're going to have to figure out how to absorb this reduction. It's not going to be easy. It may require doing things programmatically differently, but we do have a year, including a spring of annual review PPTs to plan for it. Now, I know there are principals listening to me right now going, Charles, I need paras, right? And in a difficult budget climate, they're going to hear me say, you're not getting them. Right? And that's never the easy message to deliver, but, between now and next September, we may be going more, right? We have to plan. We have to be mindful of what our resources are going to be and what they're available for.
And I imagine the fewer classrooms being operated will
That
also
too.
help relieve some of that.
Not really, Tim.
Unless they're one-to-one pairs.
That's what they all are.
Oh, they are all one.
Yeah, but they're not all one-to-one. Some are 1 to 2.
Okay,
some
that's
are
what I
1 to
mean.
3,
Not
some are
always
program-based.
all one-to-one, right?
Correct.
So
But they're all except one of our paras in the district are here because of special education student needs. Right? We just have to be mindful. We have to be careful. Now, I may be coming back to this board at some point saying I need to add paras back because we're not going to go out of compliance, right? But for now, this is where I'm comfortable starting. But there are a lot of things in this budget, like the insurance, like, it's where we're starting now. We're going to respond to student need. And again, like with kindergarten teacher, if the kindergarten enrollment comes in huge, we may need to reallocate resources, or I may be asking you for permission to add more faculty. It's not
I think just
comfortable.
to double click on what Laurel said,
Yep.
I'm keen to hear from Dawn what strategy she already has in mind for identifying how to reduce paras and remain compliant with IEPs and not take advantage of students whose parents may not be savvy enough to recognize what's going on.
Yeah, I'm sure Dawn can answer that. Why don't we wait till we get
That's
to
fine. I
Dawn's
just wanted
slide?
to put a pin in that.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
And I also would like to know, because I know from other districts, trying to have paras just this school year, just hiring and keeping paras. So I would like to know the pulse from this school year. Did we have an adequate number, or were we plugging holes? Were we pulling, pushing? Were substitutes needed to
Yes,
fill in as paras because we didn't have paras?
the para group is a very high turnover group. It's very mobile. People are often leaving to go pursue other careers or take teaching positions. It's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of churn. Of all the bargaining units, no question paras has the greatest amount of turnover. And it's always very complicated when anybody leaves us in the middle of the year. And of course, although it's gotten better, we still have trouble filling many positions, paras being one of them, in addition to bus drivers or part-time French teachers. There are some positions we just haven't, been able to fill quickly or, with a steady pool. So it's a concern, no doubt. But we'll talk about how many paras we will have, and we'll make sure Dawn answers the question in terms of how we'll deploy that. So this brought us, after these reductions, from 7.79 to 6.4. Next slide. Again, I'm fully aware that a 6.4% increase from a starting point in this economic climate isn't the most reasonable place, right? So, I want to get us to a point where we're making sure we meet student needs, but are also balancing that against what would be a reasonable request to bring forward. So I made some very, very difficult recommendations in my budget to you. One has changed already, the nurse. Our thinking was, originally, we have a nurse at the middle school and a nurse at the high school. Our thinking was to reduce one of those nurses, have one nurse between both schools, and back that nurse up with an LPN or a nurse's aide or somebody that would be an hourly rate less than nurse. Stephanie and I put in as a placeholder a paraprofessional salary as that placeholder as we investigated this. The savings between what a nurse makes and what a paraprofessional makes is about $35,000. I shared the idea with our nurse supervisor, and he didn't like it. He said, hey, not a big fan of this idea, Charles. And I said, I understand, difficult budget season. Do you have any other ideas? And we actually came up with a really good and creative one. We're going to reduce some of the supplies line items by about $10,000 in the health office supplies. And then we're going to make up the difference in the following way. We currently have in this year's budget and had planned for next year's budget $38,000 to pay for an athletic trainer. We have not been able to find an athletic trainer for that amount. We are contracting with an agency to come in and do some training around games and events, but athletic trainer is very much like speech and language pathologist. Please go into one of those two professions if you are wanting to be guaranteed employment. Our idea is this, and actually I give Frank Cardona a lot of credit for this. Our athletic trainer is going to train our lead nurse in how to do some of the wrapping and taping associated with athletic training work, so that our nurse can do that work and we can reduce the athletic trainer by $20,000. We'll still have some contracted work for the athletic trainer around jamborees and big sporting events, but when it comes to the day-to-day taping ankles and making sure students orthopedically are following their doctor's orders around practices, our school nurse will pick up that. So we've reduced the athletic trainer, reduced some of the health office supplies, and as a result, we found the savings that would make up for the difference between the original idea, which was to reduce one nurse and have a nurse and a health aide run both the high school and middle school.
Don't you have to have an athletic trainer available during the sporting events? No.
We'll still leave some money in there as a contracted service to pay an athletic trainer to come for the sporting events.
Because otherwise you're going to pay a nurse overtime to be a sport.
Right. And what the nurse will do is during the school day, and that's what the nurse is largely doing now, is student comes down before practice and needs to have their ankle wrapped or looked at. The athletic trainer contractor that we use now can train our nurse in how to do that. And Dave Opasinski has said he is willing to do that to save the nurse position.
Will that necessitate a shift in one of our nurses' hours in order to be available during that after-school time before practice starts?
Nope.
No.
It'll happen during the last period of the day.
Okay.
And again, we'll still have an athletic trainer as a contracted service
Right.
here for the games. It's largely practice related, which
Right, but
we
that's
don't-
still after school.
It's after school, but students, if practice is at 3, and
Mm-hmm.
students can come down at 2:10 before they leave and do the work that an athletic trainer would do. And the reality is this makes sense because we don't have anyone doing that now,
Right.
right? We have $38,000 budgeted for athletic trainers. Stephanie can tell you, we haven't spent nearly that amount and don't project spending that amount this year because nobody's willing to do it. We would need a $70,000 a year full-time athletic trainer to do that, but that's not going to happen. I mean, we don't do that. So if we reduce the athletic trainer, we can make up the difference between its original idea. So we're also going to reduce a 0.5 social studies teacher at the high school. We have 3.5 FTE in social studies. We're going to go down to 3. And that's sensitive to student enrollment, but it is going to drive up class sizes and potentially limit some programmatic offerings. This is a hard one. I'm talking about reducing one library media specialist. We have a library media specialist at Valley View, one at Gildersleeve, and one at Brownstone. The idea is that we would go down to 2 library media specialists and share those 2 as part of the specials rotation between Valley View, Gildersleeve, and Brownstone. That's not a fan favorite, but it's again a complicated budget when you're factoring in the drivers and the fact that we're still at a 6.4% increase. I'm also suggesting that I put a placeholder in there for 1 FTE TBD. I am not ready to say what that is yet. We have to look at student enrollment and consider that very carefully as we go into the spring. I'm suggesting this is also not another fan favorite of mine. Reducing our ESL teacher back to 0.5. As you know, we increased the ESL teacher from 0.5 to 1.0. I'm suggesting we go back to 0.5 with the ESL teacher and lean into our reading teachers to do some of that ESL support. Again, these are difficult decisions. It's a very complicated budget. took an additional 5%.
Charles, just on the
Yep.
ESL, are we seeing, and I think you referenced this in your write-up, so you can just remind me, are we seeing a reduced need for ESL support?
Why don't we get to Dawn's slide, why don't let her give you the number. They aren't going down significantly. The idea, though, is go to 0.5 and then ask our reading teachers, as we did before we even had an ESL teacher, to pick up some of the slack. But we really do need 1.0 FTE ESL, and Dawn will share that. We're just going to have to be creative and go back to the way we were doing it when we actually have a significantly lower ESL population, ELL population. These are not easy. These are very, very difficult decisions, and still that TBD position, I'm going to have to figure that out. I'm not prepared to say exactly what it is now, but it's out there.
And Charles, can I just ask a clarifying? You said the library media specialist, there would be one sharing between Valley View, Gildersleeve, and Viz?
Yeah, it would be very similar. Right now we share.
Between those.
Yeah, we share 2 people for art. We share 2 people for music. I'm talking in this budget proposing sharing 2.5 people for PE and sharing 2 people for library media. So library media specialists, the 2 remaining, will be scheduled to travel between the buildings and run the specials. But they won't be able to do all of the extra wonderful things they do when they're in-house in the library all day in one building. You can probably start to see where this budget is heading in terms of the potential for school consolidation, right? You can sort of see that pathway. This is kind of one step down that pathway. Many more positions are potentially reduced if we do consolidate. So I just want to make sure you're starting to see my thinking about what the future might hold for us in terms of the ability to reap some savings by consolidating resources and, of course, addressing some crumbling infrastructure.
Jumping on my additional concern about the library media specialist. I'm aware that it's more than offering library
100%.
Special times
Yep.
during the day. Our library staff are running WIN groups at every grade level, I think.
Every grade level.
And making the library space available to the classes for for projects, for curricular work that they're doing. And so I guess I'm curious about what you anticipate that impact being on students. Does it mean that classes won't have access to the library outside of their scheduled special time? Does it mean that WIN groups are going to be larger and fewer? What does that look like?
All of the above. Yeah, that's what it means, Laura. It means that we're going to, much like art and music now is something students do as a special, that's what library is going to become, which means that the library will not be available at certain times of the day where it is now, which means all those extra wonderful things that the librarians do because they're housed in one building, they're not going to be doing next year. And again, I want to be completely honest and transparent. It's devastating. I got the question in email from Sarah about the impact on climate culture. All of these are going to directly impact climate culture in our buildings and going to require us to schedule and do things differently and reduce some of the wonderful opportunities our students have. I do not like these, but I'm trying to be very realistic. We started with the budget drivers. You saw where we were, trying to get us to a place that balances what we absolutely need and what we can afford. Makes sense so far? But these are hard. These are not something that I'm enjoying standing here telling you about. And I've had conversations with all of these people that are potentially affected, and I can tell you they're devastated too. All right. Reduced, again, an additional 5% from Valley View, 10% from Buildings and Grounds, an additional 5% from Eric as part of technology, and I cut Dawn an additional $20,000. So I hand this out. And I have 3-hole punch list, so you can put it in your handbook. Oh, they're 2 pages. Like that.
This is, these two pages are the same one?
It's two pages.
I don't know what to say. I mean, I've just taken, well, the thing is that I'm just taking it on and
Want me to collate for you?
Yes.
Collate?
Yeah, you can put those in. All right.
well, I start at 4 o'clock in the morning too. That's supposed to start at 9.
Thanks, Charles.
Charles, this may be an obvious question, but just to clarify, are there any increases to headcount in the proposed budget? Are there any areas where additions were approved?
No, we're not adding anything. The only thing I'm suggesting we add, which is not a huge expense, would be some summer administrative support for Brownstone. We're coming to that. But there are no FTE at all added, everything's cut.
Okay.
So what I just handed you is a list of all of the reductions that came from both rounds, I think it was second round and fifth round of cuts here. All right, next slide. Oh, okay, so this brought us to a 4.85%. Next slide, Dylan. So this summarizes here all of the reductions we made that accounted for the original requests, our current staffing levels, and the budget drivers. I'm suggesting, and this is very, very hard, that we reduced 20% resources and equipment, and you have a list there of a lot of those cuts, including the technology from Eric. The $392,000 out of CIT that we moved over to capital. Reduced Dawn's original request of $900,000 by 9.6%. That included the placeholder outplacement. Reduced 4% from Bob's building and grounds requests, all of which are very needed, as our Buildings and Grounds Committee knows. 8.6 certified positions, 4 paraprofessional positions, and that is not 2, that is 1 classified position. We're going to retain the nurse, but the building maintainer / carpenter is out. So, that's a lot. I've got to say, that's a lot. We really did. We are making some significant reductions here, which, as Sarah rightfully pointed out in her email with her question, is absolutely going to affect climate and culture in the district and going to require us to schedule differently and will have some impact on programs that we currently have this year. I'll be completely honest with you. I don't see any way around these. I just don't. We have to make some of these reductions again to get to that place where we're bringing forward what I hope is perceived as a reasonable budget, right? So that's why I wrote here, these reductions will provide us just enough people and resources to keep the district afloat. If we reduce any further, we will begin chipping away at programming and services, and raising class sizes and caseloads to unmanageable levels, and affecting the quality of academics, arts, extracurricular, and all of the things that makes Portland great. That's why I stopped at the 4.8%. I couldn't go further at that point. It was becoming physically painful for me to go any deeper than we've gone based on this right here. So that's what we've cut. That's what's out. Now I want to spend some time pivoting to some of the things that are in and showing you specifically the impact of some of these reductions at the school and programmatic level. But let me stop and ask if there are any questions right now about how I got to the 4.8%.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
New positions that were brought in with ESSER money, social workers, any counselors, things like that. I don't see us touching any of those things.
You do.
Also-
You do. Out of the ESSER money are the 4 paraprofessionals.
Are
So
part of that.
what we've budgeted in the CLIF, the ESSER CLIF, is the 4 paraprofessionals.
Okay.
We supplemented the SIG grant for one of the interventionists at Gildersleeve. And we had a part of a salary of 1 teacher in there to keep class sizes reasonable. So you do see those cuts there. Those 4 paraprofessionals
Are part of that.
is the CLIF. the SIG grant that we lost,
Right.
we supplemented with $47,000 out of ESSER to keep it, right? And one teaching position. So
So-
that's what I'm glad you asked the question, because at the beginning of this budget season, Stephanie and I were aware of the cliff and had in mind how we were going to parachute off it. That was how. The other ones, particularly the insurance and the special education increase, absolutely kneecapped me, right? Like, I could handle the SIG grant, the ESSER grant, and actually the general wage and step increases. I knew those were coming. I could predict those this time last year.
Right.
It would have meant some reductions,
Right.
but I had to go a lot deeper into the reductions because of that 12% recommendation, $411,000 health hit, and the $900,000 request for special education services. But I got to be honest with you, we've got to fund that special education. We were in a deficit last year, we're in a deficit this year, and if we don't fund, those are legally required services, we are going to be in a deficit next year. So,
Charles, that was my question as well, but could you just articulate the positions one more time, because I didn't write fast enough?
Yep.
I wanted to know which positions specifically that were formerly grant funded were being reduced this year. It's the
Go
four
to
FTE
the-
paras
Yep, so-
and,
do me a favor, Dylan, go to the very second slide, with the budget driver slide. Here they are. Out of this $247,000,
Yeah.
Stephanie has ledgered 4 paraprofessionals, 1 teaching position, and a part of an interventionist at Gildersleeve that we made whole with ESSER money when we got the unpleasant surprise of the $200,000 reduction in SIG grant.
okay.
Out of the SIG grant money, it's $150,000 right now. We're using that to fund 2 special education positions.
But those are staying in the
Those are
budget
staying because we
those
have
are
150.
currently grant funded and should be
Correct.
next year as well.
God
So
willing,
it's-
and I hope I don't get a call
Yeah.
on a Friday in August from
Yeah.
the State Department again, dropping a bomb on me like they did this year, or I'm gonna lose my mind. State Department, I hope you're hearing me.
Well, I guess, and my point I wanted to make was that, everybody said, make sure you don't send, you don't bring in a lot of people with this ESSER money, and I know we were very, very careful not to do it. So I guess my point is, in asking the question, is that these reductions don't come from our folly of having all this extra money and spending it in a foolish way. We were very thoughtful about how we spent it.
We were incredibly
And this is-
thoughtful. And
right.
what we did is we spread it out over 3 years.
Right.
So we didn't put it all in 1 year and have a huge cliff. We made the cliff more of a hill.
And I
Right.
believe our this summer funding is already in place for,
Correct.
so, then the other question I have is Bridges, Harbor, all of the mental health programs that Dawn is running, how do they fare through?
They're all being maintained.
Okay, because that's important. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
we're keeping a
Well-
lot of things in-house, which is going to reduce our
And let me tell
special
you,
ed.
be completely transparent with you about that. If we didn't have RISE,
Oh.
our ABA lab, RISE, Harbor Bridges Transition Program, Life Skills Program, I would conservatively, Dawn is hearing me say this, do the math in your head, Dawn, be asking for another $4 million
Oh, yeah.
minimum.
Yeah.
Those programs, not only are they a moral imperative because they're Portland students and we should have them in-house, they are a significant savings in the differential between in-house versus outplacement, just in transportation alone.
But that's amazing too, because I see that the budget for the special ed is like 1 million something, and the transportation is 800,000. I mean, this is just crazy.
It's crazy.
I mean, we're not servicing anybody by putting them on a bus in the morning to send them somewhere.
You got it.
Crazy,
Yep.
crazy.
And when Dawn, I'm sure she's hearing me now, listening to this, shaking her head, probably to the point where she's getting a crimp in her neck, because those programs are wonderful in every
They are.
possible way. They are the definition of win-win.
And no, that's true.
Yep.
That's absolutely the truth. All right, thank you.
All right, so let's jump forward then and move to, total reductions. So any questions so far about how we've kind of winnowed away and got to the 4.8? Okay, next slide. So now I want to take you through, and the principals are on with us, and they can talk to you about, you see their cuts, right? Their cuts from things. This is what's in them. So Valley View, you see here the staffing profile, and there is funding for academic extracurricular activities, and we are, though, reducing, I want to be clear, 2 FTE out of Valley View. Last year, if you looked at that number, it was 18.2, I believe. We're going down 2 FTE. How are we doing that? Next slide. Go forward one slide. Okay, you have to follow me here. These are our class sizes. You get this every month in the enrollment report that we give you. That document is very helpful because you can see the enrollment, but you can also see class sizes. So this year, I'm going to take you through this year. We have 39 pre-K students over 4 sections, and those are the class sizes. Next year, obviously, pre-K is still to be determined. We don't yet know. Registration is underway, and Dawn and Jessica are working with Birth to 3, and we're going to figure out what our pre-K enrollment is, obviously, for next year. But we are planning for the 2 teachers to run the half-day programs, and we're not going to, I don't anticipate we'll exceed those numbers. Kindergarten, this is interesting. We have 88 students in kindergarten right now over 6 sections. Okay. If you remember, I came to you in the summer and we moved a 2nd grade teacher to kindergarten because at that moment in the summer we were at 92 students, right? It's gone down below 90. 90 is the number that Jessica and I look to. Above 90, we need the 6th section. 90 or below, follow me here, these 88 students are going to 5 sections for next year. This means that we're only going to be able to declare 2 open choice students, or 2 people move in. You know, I could potentially be back to you saying, ooh, we need that 6th section because we're back to 92. But in this budget, one of the FTE reductions is moving us from 6 sections of kindergarten to 5 sections of 1st grade. Before we panic about that, these are the class sizes of this year's 1st grade. You see the impact of that on next year's class size. We have 1 section right now, 1st grade, that's at 17. We'll have 2 at 17 next year. We have none at 18, but we'll have 3 at 18 next year. So there is an increase of 1 student in 3 of the sections. I want to be completely honest about that. But that is 1 FTE reduction. I know what you're going to mean. Yes, one of these 1st grade positions, which there's currently 6, is going to be reduced. I'm also anticipating, you see it still, kindergarten is TBD, right? They have 5 positions in the budget right now. This year there's 6. I'm reducing that to 5. I don't know what the kindergarten enrollment is yet. Registration is opening, but as you know, at our next board meeting, you're about to approve a policy aligned to state law that changes the kindergarten start age. I'm very comfortable starting with 5 this year. We might only need 4, right? It could be that we only have 60 kindergartners next year as we adjust and create that bubble to this new law. That's what I put the TBD in, right? I don't know yet, but it's a placeholder there. So whereas this year, I just want to point out one thing, then I'll answer the question. There are 12 classroom teachers at Valley View this year. 6 kindergarten, 6 1st grade. The budget that I'm presenting to you tonight has a placeholder for 5 kindergarten and 5 1st grade. So we're going from 12 to 10. That's part of the reason we're able to reduce the PE from 1 FTE to 0.5, because instead of covering the 12 sections, there will only be 5 to cover. Questions?
Because there's so much writing on how many students come in at that grade as to whether we have to go for an additional section, are we mandated or obligated to post out 2 open choice seats that could tip us over the edge, or is that optional for us?
Optional for us.
It is, okay.
That's something I'll be bringing to you as a recommendation in September. But if this is what we're budgeting for, the problem with open choice is this. We receive $10,000 per student. If we got 4 open choice students and that put us over the number 90 and we needed the 6th section, well, $40,000 doesn't pay for another teacher.
Right, that's the point. Right.
It's really a matter of, I would need to say to open choice, you can either send me 10 students which is really what we would need for a teacher, including benefit package, or 10 or more, or 2.
Two.
And that might be a conversation I'd have to have with Open Choice and say, I'm only declaring 2 because I can't afford not to. And that's, again, another difficult consideration that we're going to have to monitor. And also, I'm very nervous at that 88. That's 2 kids that could move into town. I mean, that's 2 families that, come on over, it's a lovely town. Join us. I mean, but we're right on the edge. I'm skin of the teeth here is what's in the superintendent's budget for you. But it does include that 2 FTE reduction. Okay. Done. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, before I go, real quick. Remember that number 88 first grade, because guess where they're going? Second grade. You're going to see that class size shortly. Oh, I'm sorry, back up one more time. Don't. I was very bad there. The number is not 88. We have 97 first grade students right now. Okay, that's 6 sections of first grade. Okay, come to the next slide now. Okay, again, here's the staffing profile at Gildersleeve. That is 1 FTE less than this year. And I'm going to show you where we're going to absorb that. So please go to the next slide. All right, so this year we have 81 second grade students, and they're taught over 5 sections. And you see those are the 5 section class sizes. Remember I said 97 current first grade students? Those students are going to second grade. I'm recommending we add a section to second grade so that we can keep the class sizes comparable to this year. Look at that, they're the exact same. But that means that we have to go up 1 teacher in second grade. These 81 students in second grade are going to third grade next year. Right now in third grade, we only have 76 students over 4 sections. I'm recommending we reduce 1 third grade. You see the difference here? We currently have 5. I'm recommending we go to 4. Right? These kids right here are currently in 5 sections. I don't like it necessarily, but I'm recommending they go to 4 teachers next year, which does increase their class size from second grade. But if you compare this year's class size to next year's class size, it goes up 1 in 3 sections. So we can absorb it. So reducing an FTE here and adding an FTE here becomes a wash. But this year in 4th grade, we have 113 students. These students are going to Brownstone next year. This year we have 76 students. Those 76 students are going to 4th grade next year. I'm recommending we keep the class size the exact same, but look, that's a reduction of 2 FTE. You follow me? So that's the savings in the FTE at Gildersleeve next year. Again, class sizes go up 1 student both at Valley View and Gildersleeve in first grade and 4th grade here. But there's a savings just based on the census of 3 FTE out of Valley View, 2 from Valley View and 1 from Gildersleeve. Are you with me so far? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's follow these 113 students. Jump to Brownstone, next one. Here's the staffing profile at Brownstone. Next slide. This works out nicely. We currently have 106 5th grade students over 5 sections. We'll have 113 next year. I'm not recommending we add though, but class size in 5th grade will go up. We have 1 section of 22, you have 2 here, and then you have 3 sections of 23. It's not enough to justify adding another teacher, so I'm recommending we keep it the same. 5th grade, these 113 students are going to 6th grade. I'm recommending we keep that same number of 5 teachers, and again, you can compare these 106 6th graders who are going to the middle school next year. So no staff reductions except for the library position necessarily out of Brownstone. But again, we're going down a total of 3 classes between Valley View and Gildersleeve, which is how we can make scheduling work for the reduction in PE and the reduction in library media positions because we have fewer classes that will need those specials. Any questions about that? Okay, next slide then. Here's middle school. Again, there's no adjustments to staffing profile at the middle school. And I'm not going to give you the class sizes at the middle school because it's departmentalized and you have to look at the whole schedule. And then the same for the high school. The reduction at the high school is the 0.6 French and the 0.5 health, and that's reflected in the overall certified teaching positions. Otherwise, again, I'm not going to give you class sizes for the high school because, well, the schedule's huge and everything's departmentalized. And again, we kept the school nurse in. Okay, next slide. Athletic department. This is the staffing profile for athletics. I'll just keep rolling then. Next one. Curriculum instruction technology. Here's your staffing profile for curriculum instruction and technology. Support services, and I'll pause here. This is Dawn's profile. You'll notice I moved the paraprofessionals out of the buildings and put them all here as part of support services. The only difference is that one FTE paraprofessional serves as the paraprofessional that is shared between the middle school and high school library. That is the only paraprofessional we have in the district that's not under the auspices of student support services. So let me stop there and we can unmute Dawn. And I know there were some questions about how that reduction of 4 FTE paraprofessionals is going to impact student support services, and then any other questions, and I'll leave this up here. So, Dawn, are you home safe?
Hi, good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm home nice and warm and dry.
So, Dawn, there were some questions for you. The first one was about the impact of reducing 4 paraprofessionals.
Well, I'm going to stress again, paraprofessional assignments are always driven by PPTs, and this is what's designated in the IEP. In addition, things fluctuate with our Hartford students because our Hartford student paraprofessionals are not always part of our budget as well. There's outside funding that comes in for that. So it is a moving target. Am I excited about cutting 4 paraprofessionals from the budget? By no means, no. I mean, we are right now using everybody to full capacity in our district. But, you know, and to give support to getting our budget passed and having things be workable, you know, we can reduce by 4, but I can't guarantee that we would not be back asking for those folks to come back, or those positions to come back into the budget come July 1. So it is a concern to cut down by 4, but our student need always changes. Sometimes we have more need than we have resources for, and sometimes we're able to back off our resources. It's dependent upon our student need.
Dawn, this is Sarah. Following up on our earlier conversation, it sounded like Charles was alluding to maybe some different modalities of para support, or like identifying new ways to utilize paras. And I wondered, is that something that you're thinking about? And if so, what are some early thoughts you have around how you would do that?
So there's along with the other administrators and the special ed teams in each building, there's some things that we've been looking at and revising over the years, because as I've spoken many times, our special ed prevalence rate had really grew coming out of the COVID time, and we really had to become very cognizant of how we were grouping students, what our service delivery looked like. When you know, some of our grades had up to a 28% of our students in that grade level were identified as special ed, so we really had to be careful how we grouped classes, and at the secondary level how we grouped teams. So we're looking at that very carefully. One of the things that we moved away from overall is co-teaching. That was a model that is very popular and really has, you know, great science behind it, but the reality right now is with the preponderance of such a high prevalence rate, it was really hard to be co-teaching to true fidelity. So we moved to a much more inclusionary model versus a co-teaching model, and then the students are getting their services through any combination of push-in and or pull-out services. But it's having the special education teachers and the related services personnel truly serve as resource folks versus a co-teacher. So that's one shift that we've had to make. And I would hope in the future years that we're able to come back to that, but right now we are operating much more in an inclusionary model. The other piece is we actually have a tool that we've created, and I want to, highlight Chuck Hershon and Sarah McLaughlin looked at this and helped, really fine-tune this tool. But it's just a matrix model of looking at how we're placing paraeducators, what the student need is, how the paraeducator is going to support that need, and that whole going through that matrix is helping us to understand and make sure that we're being very consistent in how we're applying the support of an additional adult. Putting a paraeducator with a student is highly restrictive. And it does, while it gives great support, we've got wonderful paraeducators, we also want to be careful that we're not building such a significant need that the students become dependent upon that paraeducator support. So we want to build a model that is able to fade as is appropriate. And that paraeducator matrix tool is helping us to make sure just another check to look at those items.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dawn.
And Dawn, this is Kim. I have a question regarding this current year and how you have felt the needs of the students have been met with the amount of para support that we currently have. Have there been instances where substitutes had to be hired for longer term situations to support kids?
There's been a couple of places. It's not nearly as bad as it was last year. So I feel like we're making good positive progress. Sometimes it's a matter of a new student comes into the mix or a student's status changes, and we weren't counting on that need for paraeducators. So now we have to look at hiring, maybe reallocating or moving people around in that way. And I love what our principals do to help, really look carefully at what they're doing with their paras to make sure we're meeting student needs. I'm not going to say it's perfect, and I'm not going to say we're covered 100% this year, but we are much better than we were in the past. And the fact that regular absences are being covered a little bit better than last year is helping us because we're not having to pull paras off of their assignment to cover classes or things like that. So I'm seeing progress, but we're definitely not a perfect model. I don't know that there's any perfect models in the state right now.
Dawn, I have a question. The money that is being reduced from the transition program, how will that affect your programming? I know it will probably put you back here at the high school, but how does that affect personnel or anything that you might be cutting, or you may not know at this point?
I don't foresee us having an effect upon personnel. I think morale and the excitement behind the program, and we were just there last week in highlighting, showcasing the program with you guys as a board meeting. There's a lot of excitement and both from the families, the community, and children, and our young adults and their staff behind it, and the excitement will move into something based in the community versus being based back in their high school. I think is much more a climate and culture thing than it is anything else. Okay. And I'm not giving up completely. We had built in the resources to be able to fund a placement in the community. Now we're going to have to, if that has to be cut, we are going to have to look at other options, because I don't see us staying at the high school forever. It's nice to have a fallback, and it's nice to know that the state will support us having a program in the high school. But like I said last week, this is not just a continuation of high school for these young adults.
Okay, thank you.
Dawn, this is Sarah. I want to follow up on something Tim had asked earlier about potentially opening the Transition Academy to young adults from surrounding communities. Do you have a sense of whether placement at the high school would permit or be attractive to students from other districts to be placed here? And secondly, do you have a sense of whether the program would be prepared or be in a state next year to accept students, young adults from other districts?
I'm going to answer your second question first, Sarah. I feel like we are in a place to entertain and accept enrollment from outside districts. And the state said as long as we, the CSDE said as long as we move back into the high school next year, that we don't stay, or into a community setting, that we are, we're a standalone program that would be able to do that. That being said, we talk about attractability of programming. If I were gonna send one of our students to another district because we didn't have a program, I would be kind of picky about where we went, and I don't know that I would send them to a program that is, in essence, looking a lot like a continuation of high school, because that's not what transition programming should be about.
Thank you.
Hey, Dawn.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead. I'm just doing some quick math here. We spend $62,000 in tuition per student, but yet we spend $45,000 per student for transportation. When are we at a point where we could, how can we maybe try something different? I mean, we could buy 5 buses for that amount, or we could buy 3 buses and hire 4 people. I mean, are we exploring every option to get that cost down?
We are, and I'm going to tell you, Dave, the biggest issue right now is the fact that transportation costs have grown so fast. And that right there is an obstacle. If you look at our transition program, we are thinking outside the box. We purchased a van, we've got drivers that are qualified to drive, and we're using that van to transport our transition kids. Otherwise, I'd be relying on a transportation company to be doing that. And I will tell you, the cost of the van and the cost for the drivers is much less than what we would be paying if I was contracting that service anywhere else. If you remember, just a few short years ago, we were in the business of transportation. We did have 2 small buses, and then we went down to 1 small bus that were owned by the district and driven by staff members. Probably one of the biggest issues was we did not have an adequate source or pool of drivers. So when our drivers were absent or they had to be pulled to do other things, because the drivers were also custodians, so they had to take care of building responsibilities as well, we wound up with buses sitting in the parking lot and nobody to transport our kids. And that was when the decision was made to move out of the transportation business and just contract with M&J to do our transportation. But that was also pre-COVID, and that was also when our transportation costs were a little more reasonable. It is out of this world, and it's just starting to become competitive again, because for 3-4 years there was so many times we couldn't send kids to programs because we didn't have transportation. So there's, that's a tough world.
Yeah, I think it's time to revisit that, in my opinion, because we spend more to transport 20 students than we do the rest of the entire district.
Oh, yeah.
So it tells me there's inefficiencies there, or there could be efficiencies by bringing it in-house, or finding somebody other than M&J or somebody that's willing to do the service at a better rate.
Right. I agree, Dave.
Dawn, this is Laurel. I was just hoping that you could talk to us a little bit about this EL teacher reduction from 1.0 to 0.5. I'm really concerned about this. I think I read, you may have to remind me, but I think I read that we still have 55 students who require that service, and so I'm just hoping you could tell us a little bit more about the impact that's going to have on being able to serve those students.
It's going to have a tremendous impact. It was just 2 years ago I was before you asking to move that position to a 1.0 because of the student need, and also what is scientifically and procedurally mandated for us to be doing for students that are learning English as a second language. And our current EL teacher is a wonderfully talented individual who brought to us, once we spoke with her about what was going to be proposed in these cuts, she shared with us what's going on with the EL Parents Bill of Rights that's coming out next year, and we're going to have a responsibility to be educating our students with a certain number of service hours and a certain level of staff commitment to each group of students. And by those current standards, I apologize for my dog in the background, that set of standards, we're talking about the student caseload that Auburn has, should only have 40 students in her caseload for a 1.0. Now, we're talking now about a caseload that's in the low 50s, and we're talking about cutting it to a 0.5. I also, we understand that we have reading specialists at each building, especially at the lower elementary, that can work with the students in conjunction with what Julie is doing. But there's periods of time, like, as I explained a few weeks ago in my board report, there's periods of time where the only thing Julie's doing her entire school day is putting the kids through the Lost Links testing. And that's a good 6 weeks where the kids really aren't getting any services other than participating in the Lost Links testing. Now, that was, we can understand that because the rest of the time they're getting great services with them. But if we go to 0.5, it's going to cut that back tremendously. Cutting this position to a 0.5 and being able to put the rest of this support responsibility onto the reading specialist is not an ideal situation. But once again, we're looking at getting this budget to a point that it could be passed. But that's at great cost to our English language learner families.
Dawn, this is Sarah. Just to put a fine point on it, if I'm understanding you correctly, we could be facing a parent's Bill of Rights next year that would require us to staff our ELL supports back up to the levels they are currently or beyond. Is that correct?
It's not a full mandate at this point. It is a recommendation from the State Department of Education. So it's unlike an IEP that has a mandate behind it. This is currently not a full mandate. Now, it's going to change 12 months from that. When we're looking at the budget for the following year, it will be mandated. To what level, I'm not positive just yet.
Yeah, and how funded or unfunded the mandate is also going to be something that I know the Superintendent's Association and CABE are going to be interested in.
Yeah. Right now, for the level of students that we have that are English learners, you'll see when Charles talks later about other forms of funding. Our EL grant for our Title III grant is like $4,000 or $5,000. It's a drop in the bucket. So there is a big gap between what's mandated and what's funded as a mandate.
Which should frustrate all of us.
Yes, and does.
Yes. And especially our EL teacher, who has done a phenomenal job of building up programming. She's a wonderful gem in our district.
No doubt. All right, stay tuned, Dawn. We're going to get to that funding source momentarily as I kind of push us forward here a little bit. So, we have one more. I think buildings and grounds. Did I cover that one yet?
No.
And then, of course, here's our facilities department. All right, next slide then. So, I know. Oh, and central office. Okay, now we'll go to the next slide. So, I know Dave in particular has been asking about revenue sources. Stephanie and I kind of talked about it sometimes, yes, so I think what we've been calling grants, I want to change the way we talk about that, and let's call that revenue, right? So, I want to go through these because I know there's interest about, what comes from local property tax dollars, what comes from state, what comes from federal. So I want to kind of run through these, and Stephanie's on it, will be available to answer any questions. So the biggest state revenue grant that we received is called the Equalized Cost Sharing Grant. This year, we know we're going to be receiving $4,597,000. So you see the difference. There's a $30,000 increase. I know there was a lot of fanfare and back-patting about maintaining state funding. It went up $30,000. I would suggest we could certainly benefit from a lot more than that if anybody was bumping into a legislature somewhere along the way. But our equalized cost sharing is what it is this year. We know that that's what we're going to receive. We're definitely glad it's not being reduced. There's a lot of discussion in the state about how equitable funding is and the share that has to be shouldered at the local level. But this is what it is. That's one of our revenue sources. The local education agency, the LEA, is what we're asking property tax owners or whatever revenue sources the town generates to fund. And again, we asked property taxpayers in Portland to pay this amount, and you do see the increase next year. Would I love to be standing here telling you that that number was higher and helping us offset it? Well, I'm not. I mean, that's where we are. And again, with the difference between these two, if there's questions about where that's coming from, go back to the budget drivers, right? So the increase in general wage and insurance is absolutely reflected in the difference between what we've asked for this year and what we're asking for next year from the local education agency or the Portland taxpayer. Yes, sir.
I don't understand the math, because if we're asking for 900 and something extra in special education, we get, the numbers jump around, let's say 75% of an amount above 35,000. Where's that extra?
Hold that thought. It's coming. Hold that
Okay.
thought. Keep that question right there, and I got a slide for it, and I'm going to answer that question when we talk about excess cost. All right, so if you add what we ask local property taxpayers to pay and the ECS cost that we receive from the state, it comes to that number. Now, if you look down the front page of my letter, that's the number I included there. That's the number that we've always thought of separately from other grants and entitlements that we receive. That number is less than, significantly less than, you'll see shortly, what we actually pay. We pay much more. We do, it's close to $27 million that we pay. But when we talk about local property taxes and then, of course, funding from Hartford that's generated from our income tax and other sales tax and other state revenues, those are the two numbers that we sort of look at here. But again, that's not the full amount we pay, which is part of the answer to your question in terms of special ed funding, title funding, other grant funding that we receive. So bear those two things in mind, and we're going to talk about other revenue sources that come into the district, which we're now referring to as revenue sources as opposed to grants, although I may slip and call them grants shortly. Next slide. So in addition to those amounts from the state and local property taxpayer, we receive all of these funding sources here from a combination of the federal and state government, right? IDEA, it stands for Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. This is that funding that flows from that. Not nearly enough, Washington, D.C. You passed the law, but you never really funded it the way the law had in mind. I could give you a seminar in that. You know, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act was a monumental piece of legislation that obligated us, when we talk about legal mandates, that's where they flow from. And we talked about a $900,000 increase on top of what we're already paying. Well, look at what we get from that federal legislation to pay for it. Just saying, right? It's important that we're aware of that. This money should be significantly higher from the federal government, but they passed an unfunded mandate through that federal legislation. All of these title fundings and Medicaid are also from the state that we received. Dawn mentioned Title III. That's part of what we use to pay for our ESL teacher. Again, not nearly enough, if you're asking my honest opinion, but of course I'm going to say that. It is what it is. These are well-intentioned and important laws that were passed with the right spirit, but they weren't passed with the money that should have flowed from them. Again, that's my editorial. That's my soapbox moment. So all of these, if you add all of these up, total federal grants, $496,000. From that, again, that federal law flows our obligations to fund the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. It has always been and continues to be woefully underfunded. From the state, we received our school improvement grant. I have $150,000 that's going to be used to pay for 2 positions at Gildersleeve. This is our last year of that state grant. Again, we had anticipated $350,000. That's what we were initially promised by the state. They reduced that too. We're going to count on $150,000 to help supplement next year's budget. I hope I don't get another nasty phone call in August. And I made that very clear to Greg and our friends at the State Department. Open Choice, we receive $10,000 per student who participates as Open Choice. We're budgeting, as you can see, for 65 students. That's what we can anticipate we'll have next year. Student and social support, this is a supplement, an additional amount of money that we get from, as part of the Open Choice Grant. That's why we try to stay around or at 5%, or is it 10%, Stephanie, of our student enrollment? Remind me. 5% of our student enrollment, if they're open choice students, we get a bonus. So that's why we try to keep that number where it is. And again, you'll have the opportunity to weigh in on that when we do our open choice seat declarations in the spring. But we're counting on 65 open choice students, we're maintaining the 5% threshold, so we get this additional bonus. And I'm going to spend a moment talking to you about excess cost. Stephanie's anticipating that we're going to get $986,000 from the state in excess cost for special education. This is Stephanie's best guess. We don't know that that's the amount. We certainly hope it's more, but like we learned last year, sometimes it's less, right? We're going to get our first excess cost grant reimbursement in February. You'll probably hear the cheer or the groan from central office the first week of February, and it will be reported out to you. And absolutely, we're counting on that. Otherwise, Stephanie will tell you we're going to be talking about deficit again this year. So this is frightening. This is what we're anticipating, but we don't know because sometimes the state doesn't fully fund those unfunded mandates.
I got a question.
Yes.
On the sheet in the book, it says 2023, 2024 grants, but this says this assumes for the 24, 25. What number is which?
These are what we're projecting for next year.
Okay, because it says 23, 20, 24
My bad. It should,
grants.
for next year. This is what we're building into our budget assumptions as part of the budget you have in front of you.
That's for 24, 25.
For 24, 25, yes.
The other thing I would like to ask, I've asked this for years, but can we get like a history that says what do we do actual in 2022? What is 2023 estimate, and then what is 24, 25 projection?
Sure, Stephen, can we provide like a 2-year look back at these grant funding sources, or a 3-year look back?
All of them, or just excess cost?
Everything.
Yeah, I can do that.
Because where I'm going with this is like the excess cost grant. So if last year we got $722,000, but yet this year we're going up $900,000, we'll get $986. Hey, we've got $250 more. That $900 really is only $700 increase.
They've changed.
You know what I'm saying?
They've changed the formula. Martin Mooney added a new formula into it, which is where
Hold the thought.
they
We're
keep
gonna
changing.
hold
But
the thought.
It's not that.
It's not that.
But my point is that we keep talking about the same thing every year. We never see anything in writing. I'd like to see in parentheses it says, okay, this year we assumed X amount at X percent. Last year we got X amount at X percent. And for the estimate for next year, we're going to assume X amount at X percent. So we know what we're talking about, and we're not always asking the same question over and over again.
They keep changing.
You can rewind Enterprise or EGMS and get that, right, Stephanie?
Well, it's not an EGMS. It's because it's not like that we applied for it. They just give us the money.
Right.
But the document that Dawn has in her pile in the packet there on the table, she broke out and explains where the 986 comes from, and Charles added a slide this year to kind of break down how it goes. We don't know, like, Dawn puts it, like, they put it in on December 1st, whoever's in our system at that time. From December 1st through May 31st, when the year closes, there could be an increase, a decrease, it could change. We never know what that total number is gonna be, because we don't know what our costs are gonna be. That's $200,000 more because there's 3 more students in outplacements for next year that were budgeted this year.
Right.
So obviously, if our costs increase, our excess cost is gonna increase, the reimbursement.
Correct. So because you made a budget, you had to make assumptions. I just want to know what the assumptions are.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're going to know what they're. I want to know what they were.
So there's a document in that pile, that Dawn provided, that's in the big pile that Charles brought to you guys.
Yeah, which we've already stated that we were all very confused on that page. So what we're asking for, I'm asking for, is something more to clarify that.
What document are you referring to?
It's in the pile of all the, how you guys requested all with more detail. There's a document.
Was there something here that I didn't
Yeah.
receive anything?
Hold on, yeah, you're about to get it. Hold on.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, you shouldn't reference this to things that we don't have in front
right,
of us.
hold on, we haven't gotten to that. I don't think we've gotten to that breakout yet,
Yeah.
Stephanie. because I'm gonna spend a few minutes with you tonight talking about excess cost and why it's so complicated, and then the other thing we've been asked is where all of our current positions line up with these grants, right?
Can I just go back to what Dave's question was, because I wanted to make sure that I understood what you were asking for. Are you asking for like a side-by-side, like we get in the budget document, where we can see what was budgeted in 22-23, what the 22-23 actuals were, what was budgeted in 23-24, and what is being budgeted for 24-25?
Correct. And how we kind of, if we have a magic formula, so say we assume it's this much, and it's 72%, and we're gonna budget at that, but it could be 88% or whatever the number is, but what did we
It's not,
guesstimate?
but it's not a percentage. They have a formula which has changed,
Yeah,
and they've tiered it, and it requires a little bit of explanation.
Here, you're gonna get.
Well, that's what I'm asking for,
Yeah,
the explanation.
I think you're probably half a step ahead of me,
Yeah,
so
it's
Okay.
coming.
loop back to this. It's
But I
coming
want
good.
to finish one other point, though. We talked about this last year, is some of the confusion is how we do budgets. Because you're saying us now that our budget is really probably $26 or $27 million.
Next slide, please.
But you bury it with grunt funding to make it look lower, and then we see something different. So we're kind of playing magic with numbers.
Here it is. All of the positions and things that I'm about to hand out to you are funded from a combination of equalized cost sharing, the big state grant that we get, that should be bigger, but is what it is. Right, that's what we can anticipate this year. This, what we're asking the property taxpayers from the town of Portland to shoulder. This, which is that last slide I just showed you, the IDEA grant and all the title grants. And the state grants, including open choice, the SIG grant, and equalized cost sharing, which I'm gonna land with. So I've heard this from you, David, and I want to be clear. What we're asking for from the property taxpayers in the town of Portland, which they'll vote on someday and will be reflected in the mill rate, is going to be that amount. That's what we're asking the property taxpayers for. We're expecting to get that amount from Hartford, that amount from Washington, D.C., and that amount for our participation in open choice and excess cost, which I'm going to go over and land with. So, to your point, Dave, yes, what it costs to run all of our schools in a year, that's it.
And I'd love to see that chart with last year and this year and next year, so we can kind of see, okay, the cost went up, but the grants went up as well.
You got it. Yep. And what we've also, because we've heard that request, and I think I'm answering it here. What Stephanie provided for you here.
Just one page?
One page. Yep. Is a breakout of all of the positions, right, and where they're funded from. Right. So Stephanie, thank you for putting this together. So you can see what positions are funded out of the LEA, what positions are funded, which, again, LEA includes the state grant, and which positions are grant funded, right? And the reality is if, it would be a very bad day, the grant funding was reduced or went away, we would have a choice. Eliminate the position, which is often our interventionists, our ELL teacher, and others, or keep the position but pay for it often out of the local education agency funding. Are you following me on that? So, yes, Dave, you are right when you say that $24 million that I'm talking about as the burden of local property taxpayers and what we get from the state, that's not it. That's not the sum total that it costs. We factor in, again, our participation in open choice, excess cost, and IDEA grant funding, which are 2-year grants, right?
So can I just ask a quick question, just because I'm trying to wrap my head around this, and I think I've struggled with this every year to understand why ECS and LEA funding is included in this budget document, but the federal and the state grants are treated separately. And I think I understand, but just need to say it out loud, that it's because the town receives the ECS funding as revenue in right, like the town receives ECS funding as revenue. So this complete picture of LEA and ECS funding is what is presented to the town. The grants, the federal and the state grants come to the district and are treated separately than the ECS funding. Is that an accurate, I didn't sum that up very gracefully, but is that somewhat accurate?
Yes.
Okay,
It is,
all right.
because they come with
So
grants.
if you go to the town budget book,
Yeah.
and they hand it out when it's adopted, and you go to the line for revenue sources, and you go to the Board of Ed, you'll see education cost, it's education cost share, equalized cost share, same thing. You'll see property from taxes, and they do a couple of adjustments, where they take some of their general fund money, and that's how they get to the dollar amount that they do the taxpayer. So all of this is available in the big town
Right.
budget also.
But it's necessary that the federal grants and the state grants be treated separately because that really
Correct.
that doesn't interface with the town side of things at all.
Correct, because it's not a fluid amount of money that comes in all the time. Like, we know our ECS is gonna be this amount, and we know once the budget is adopted that the LEA is gonna be this much. But we don't know how much excess cost we're gonna get. We don't know how
Right.
much we're gonna get in title. So because they're ever changing, that's why they can't, and they're treated separately.
Gotcha.
And also grants, like the IDA grant comes with very specific requirements for use. So it's not, the equalized cost sharing is the town's share of property taxes that have been collected that we get back. And that can be spent for anything that we want to spend it on to operate the schools. The grants come with caveats for what they can be used for, and I know we had library books that were stamped Title I or Title II because the money was used to buy particular books back in the day, or whatever.
And
So
all of that then shows up in the audits.
it does in the audits, exactly.
So we can't.
And to the point, I think when we were asking about excess costs, so if you look back at last year's budget book, Dawn was budgeting excess cost to only be $494,170
Right.
at that point in time with the, 11 students that were outplaced. Fast forward now to the current day of the budget that was from that time, our excess cost reimbursement right now is $727,801 because our expenses increased, so our reimbursement increases.
And you don't want to intermingle funds in this way again, so we get clean
Right.
audits.
Okay. Yes. So do you want to talk us through this document?
Okay, so what I just gave you, and Stephanie, thank you for putting this together. Kim had actually asked for a breakdown of what positions are paid for out of what funding sources. So you see there the breakdown, and it identifies which is IDEA, which is title, and again, the interventionists. Obviously, the bulk of positions in the district are funded out of these two sources, but some very important positions in the district we do fund from those federal grants and state grants that we sometimes, like the first week of February, bite our fingernails waiting for that first payment so we can figure out how much we're getting, which is never a comfortable moment.
Can I just clarify, these are salaries, this
Correct.
does not include benefits, that's
Those salaries, correct. Yep, that's a separate trunk, and that's difficult because some people take benefits and some people don't.
And thank you for this.
You're welcome. Okay, let's go to the next slide, and I want to spend a few minutes kind of on.
Sorry, Charles, are we moving past this document?
Yes, did you have questions on it?
Yeah. What does OC stand for, under attendance?
Open
OC?
choice.
Oh, thank you. And then, so custodians, nurses, certified admin, non-union, coaching, extracurricular, are those all what's totaling to the total LEA funded? It doesn't
Yes.
specify, but it seems like those add up.
Right, yeah, that's a spreadsheet that adds up to the totals, right, Stephanie? I mean, you just did that in Excel?
So yeah, so that total LEA funded, if you look on the big object, the big sheet that does the higher level, if you add up 11011, 11012, 11014, and 11015, you'll get the 13,953,856.
That's actually not what I'm asking. On the sheet that Charles just handed out, it specifies which roles are funded by which sources.
Right.
And
Okay.
then it lists custodians, nurses, certified admin. It doesn't specify what funding source those are, so I'm just
So
clarifying,
those
are
are
those
all,
LEA?
yeah, those are all LEA.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's just, paras and certified salaries are covered under grants right now.
Got it, thank you.
All right, let's jump to the next slide. Okay, and again, in the handout you're about to see, that's the one that you have there. So next slide. All right, so the last thing I want to unpack a little bit what makes this equalized cost sharing grant so darn complicated. And we can project, we can predict, but why the stress? Why are we holding our breath now when we're going to get our first payment in February and we'll know? So I want to go through this with you to answer questions, right? So the excess cost grant is a reimbursement we receive from the state for, as it's titled, costs above the threshold that we pay for special needs students, some of whom are outplaced, majority of whom are outplaced, right? As you've noticed, the outplacements are very expensive. So the next logical question is then, well, what's the threshold, right? So we are obligated as part of the LEA budget, again, local property taxpayers and state ECS grant, to pay 4.5 times the net per pupil expenditure. So next year, the first $92,293 of whatever it costs to educate a student, that number and below, we pay. Right? That's our obligation. That's the threshold, $92,000. For every dollar above $92,293, we ask for and receive a percentage of that as a reimbursement. So what is the reimbursement rate after the first $92,293? They changed the formula recently and created a tier system to try to bring some stability to it, but we're learning that hasn't necessarily brought as much stability because sometimes they don't fully fund even the new tiers, right? But we're hoping and counting on for every dollar above, so as soon as we spend $92,294, that $1 above that threshold, we get 76 cents back on every dollar above the threshold. Yeah. So 23 cents above the threshold we continue to pay. We are anticipating, and that's what the number Stephanie has put in based on current need, current usage, 76 cents back on every dollar above the threshold. This is the most important question here, though. Why is this so hard for us to calculate? Well, why is it, Stephanie, you see in the previous slide, Stephanie put that number there, but I can't stand here today and tell you that's what we're going to get back. That's what we're hoping to get back, and that's what our best guess is right now. Why can't I say that definitively? And I know that creates some frustration because it's a big number, right? Well, two things. One, student needs change. Student programming changes. Some students have emerging needs that we have to respond to. Students can move into the district, or students can move out of the district, or students can change within the district. We only know what we know. We don't know what next year's kindergartners are going to need because they haven't enrolled yet, right? And we don't know who's going to come on over and join us or who's going to leave, right? That Dawn's census is always changing. That's why she gives you that update every month and says, look, we're up to 21 outplacements. That's an increase, right? We're budgeting for that next year, but Dawn could come to us, well, it won't be Dawn, but the next Dawn could come to us in September and say, we only have 19 outplacements. Well, that works towards our budget advantage because if 2 students aged out or moved, great. But we could also have 24 outplacements based on needs that are emerging in the district or new folks who move in as residents. That's the big one. The first thing is student needs change, right? But then the second one is, and this is a function of our advocacy, is it's very frustrating because the state doesn't always fully fund it, right? We get different amounts. We are hoping for 76 cents on every dollar above that. Maybe it'll be 88 cents. Could be less, right, Stephanie? I mean, you won't know until the first week of February what we're getting this year. And we're taking our best guess at what we'll get February 2025, right? I mean, those are the two things that make this a moving target and so frustrating and complicated to plan for. So Dawn, if you're still on, or Stephanie, I would ask you, did I explain that correctly, and is there anything you wanted to add to it?
Can I throw out something? The minimum, the MBR is part of the ECS formula, which means it's the minimal amount of budget requirement. And from year to year, that changes because of the number of students that we have
Sure.
that are eating up the special ed costs. So and you can, it's on the state website, you can go in and you can look at, and if you want history, it goes all the way back to when this started in 1989, 1990, and they continue to fiddle with this formula, adding tiers this year, which gave some of the districts which had higher special ed costs, like the inner cities, they tried to it's an equalization of excess cost. And unfortunately, Portland thought they were getting more, and they equalized it in other ways, depending on the tier you were in. It is complicated, and this comes up every year in the legislature, and we did get increases, but the tiers gave us some increases and in some cases didn't. But we're still asking for them to fully fund this and to equalize it for everybody to make it fair. About 3 years or 4 years ago, Philip got a letter. The MBR was less than what it should have been, and they were going to fine us about $75,000 if we couldn't prove. Because what happened was Dawn started to create these mental health programs in district, which cut our MBR down, which gave us less money and a potential fine. And Philip wrote the letter, and we were able to prove that we were actually saving money and spending it here in the district, and so we didn't have to pay the fine that year. And that was the beginning of the Wheeler Clinic. So, you can go online on the .gov, and there's a couple of other websites that explain it really a lot clearer.
Yeah.
It's like mud.
So Dawn, I know that this is the world you live in, and I know how hard you work to try to stay on top of all this and put in for the Medicaid and the excess cost reimbursement and all the amazing things you do to keep our departments and things afloat. Is there anything you wanted to add to this slide or any other context you wanted to bring to it?
No, the only thing I would caution us on, and this is just semantics for the board members, and Meg brought up a really good example of the MBR quotient. That ties into IDEA funding, but ECS is the educational cost sharing. That is not the same as excess cost grant, so don't get the two confused. ECS is not a special ed component, and there's a direct formula to it, and it doesn't change other than the percentage changes every year. Excess cost has lots of complicated formulas, and there's lots of changes dependent upon the students that are represented every year. So that is much more variable. And it is a reimbursement. It's kind of like your income taxes. You pay out your income taxes, and you're charged what you have to pay, and then you get reimbursed for the rest, for the excess. So this is a reimbursement, and it is a moving project. But I love the way you laid it out with the questions and the answers, because it gives a really good explanation.
Stephanie, is there anything?
One last thing I just wanted to point, sorry, I'm not sure who I just talked over, but one last thing to point out is the last payment, any adjustments that get made to the excess cost grant after the end of the school year, because like Stephanie said, we have to adjust everybody's excess cost at the end of the school year once we know exactly what we've paid in. We can estimate all we want, but we have to look at exactly what gets paid in. And if there was an overage and we're getting more reimbursement back, it goes to the town after June 30th. It doesn't come back to the district. It goes to the town. Am I saying that correct, Stephanie?
It doesn't come back physically. It reduces our ECS for the following year.
Yes.
So I'll log in and I'll see our entitlement, and then we'll see an excess cost reduction if there was any adjustments if we got overpaid.
Has that happened? Does that happen regularly, or how
It's
frequently?
happened in the past, yes. It's not a lot of money. It's not a lot.
Yeah. We're usually pretty close.
Yeah, it's usually very close. I can go back and look at history because that's all in the state system.
Yeah.
But I have seen, like I said, it's like $20,000 if that. It doesn't affect us that much. But again, like Dawn said, when we put in for certain things, somebody's transportation could change, somebody can switch an outplacement, and we try to do to the best of our ability what we're entering. And then when the audit happens, that's when they find the differences, really.
And for clarity, the excess cost reimbursement reimburses us on the cost of outplacement tuition, related services, and transportation. That's like inclusive of those items?
Yes, yep.
Any
So
cost, any special education costs for that child that exceed the 92,000 and
Right.
whatever, the 92,000 threshold.
They could be at an outplacement, but if they were in district first, we could account for those expenses for the if they were in district for a portion of it.
Right.
We can account for expenses for that, if they had evaluations in district, and then once they're outplaced, if it's all in the same year, we can add that all together and put that in as the total cost.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to say with the excess cost, 2 years, so the tiered thing just started last year. 2 years ago, I don't know if you remember, we got 84% reimbursement.
Yeah.
And the whole point of the tiered system is to make districts that weren't getting what they should be getting, and districts that were getting more than they were getting, less than. So they were trying to make it an average over all the districts, and it's based on your Anglic number, whatever. But that's why, because a lot of districts were getting way more than, not that they need it, because I'm sure everybody needs it, but they were trying to they created this tier system to make it equal for everybody. And then the whole point of the tiered system, so it goes by your number. So we're in the second tier. So we'd be the lowest would be 76.3, and the hope was to fully fund it, and then we would be in the top, which would be 88%. So that's why last year the state kept saying we're fully funding it, we're fully funding it, and then they came back in April and said, oh, the bill didn't pass, we couldn't fund it. So that's why this year we're sticking to the 76.3%, which is the minimum. We wouldn't get any less because now that the tier systems are here, it won't go lower than 76.3, but I'm not comfortable saying we're going to get 88 until I get that first payment.
So
and it
this-
shows that that's what it's going to be, because there's been no talk, there's been no nothing as to if it's funded or if it's not funded.
So the state has given you a range. Our tier is eligible for a range of 76 cents up to 88 cents.
Up to 88% if it's fully funded.
Right. Okay.
I'm going to trust you guys on the math, but it doesn't work for me. At a high level, we have a budget of $2.4 million in expense, and if we have to spend $93,000 per student, that's $1.9 million. That means the difference is $500,000. If we get 76 cents on a dollar, that's $380,000 of excess cost reimbursement at the high level, but yet we're showing $980. So there's something I'm missing, but.
So if we have DCF placements, which we do, we only have to do 1%
Yeah.
times. So
The threshold, sorry Stephanie, but the threshold for students that are placed in our district for DCF reasons, for custody reasons, the threshold is only the per pupil expenditure. So the threshold is much lower. So 2 of our students are in that position. They're very high cost students. So that was a little extra bonus, that we were able to take.
Yeah, okay, good, thanks. I'm trying to wrap my head around the high numbers, and I'm a math guy, do this every day of my life, and these numbers just didn't add up.
It'd be hard to run a business like this, wouldn't it, Dave?
What's that?
It'd be hard to run a business like this, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, so
And
that's
why,
the difference.
oh, I'm sorry, Stephanie, were you good?
No, I said that's the difference. It's because we get more for the DCF placements.
Okay, all right.
And that's why we calculate the projected reimbursement for each student individually, because it is based on it. So you can't do the whole total and then subtract from the whole total, because it doesn't work that way. It's not the way it's designed to work.
Yeah, maybe for next budget, we get a little bit more detail. We don't need any names, obviously, or anything like that, but maybe we can get a breakout of how this goes. 18 at this rate, 2 at this rate, get a little bit more explanation of some of these numbers. I mean, it would help me digest some of them easier.
all right, thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, Joel. All right, so that's everything. I know I just covered a lot of ground in the past 2 hours. I'll certainly answer questions. Otherwise, I just remind everybody of how we did this last year. I just dropped a lot of information on you. I'm sure that you've reached saturation level, and we do have another go at this Thursday. But I really appreciate and liked the emails you sent with questions, and we'll always reply to those with CCs to the whole board. Otherwise, I could entertain questions tonight, or, we could give you a day and some email exchanges if you have questions over the next couple of days, and then get back at it Thursday, or keep going tonight.
Can you remind me of the timelines? Is there expectation of when we need to have like a?
Yeah, Stephanie, or Tricia too. We have our budget workshops. It was changed. They actually scheduled one of our budget workshops on the night of a board meeting, but we did have it changed. I just don't know that date off the top of my head. I'm hoping Stephanie does, or Tricia, if they're hearing me, know. But my hope is that, we finish our budget workshops, and that this would pretend, the way we did it last year is, we had our 2 budget workshops, and then we put it as an old business action item on the board agenda for what would be next Tuesday. I'm hoping at that point you're prepared, or I can make any adjustments you want me to make in it, or otherwise the process involves, this is the superintendent's budget. It needs to, at some point before, we have a deadline for it, and again,
It's the last Friday of January.
I was trying to find it myself.
So there we go. Thank you. God, people are listening. The last Friday of January, we have to have a Board of Education budget, and it becomes the Board of Education budget after you vote on whatever changes you want to make, or direct me and Stephanie to make. We just need to do that by the end of January, so that at that point, I'm out there advocating for your budget, and it's no longer my budget.
So does that mean if we don't do it next Tuesday, we have to have a special meeting, or is there another meeting in between?
We do have is this the second meeting in January? So we would need a special.
We would need a special meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next Tuesday is our second meeting, so if we need additional time beyond that, we'll schedule a special meeting.
So I just have a question. Obviously, this is as bad as you said it was. Are there things in the budget that were left alone that you would consider cutting, or, for instance, $90,000 for dental insurance? I know we'd have to renegotiate this. Having people pay for some part of that or all of it. I don't, $90,000 doesn't fund a whole lot, but it may protect a position or whatever. Are there other things that you pay for play sports? I know that we've been down that road before, and I don't think I want to go down that road again, but are there things that you've thought of that you could share with us tonight, that if we said, look, you're not going to get rid of the social studies teacher, or we can't get rid of this ELL teacher, we want a full-time, is there some way that, are there some things that we could move around or look at that would help to fund that in a way? And again, that doesn't have to be answered tonight, but just, I'm sure this keeps you up at night.
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of these things are contractually negotiated. Right. So we really don't have the ability to say, pay more for dental insurance, or that's something we would have to negotiate, and in the contracts are all of the premium cost shares, they're laid out. I wouldn't go there, right? The reality is particularly with the benefit line items, those are function of your FTE count, and then those people within the FTE who take the benefits. So I definitely have already made one brave move with the reduction from 12% to 10%. At this point, I wouldn't suggest, and I'm sure if you saw Stephanie up on the screen again, you'd see her shaking her head, that we go lower than that.
Oh, no.
But that's one area. Like I'll remind us of what happened last year, right? Because it could happen this year. We could have an interesting moment in February when, hey, the bids came back and it's a 1% increase, right? Like, that's a great day, right? And then that's a moment where I will bring some recommendations to you that might include a combination of reducing that percent increase or adding positions back, or one or the other, right? And the board would have to take a position on that. Certainly, if that one area came back as, hey, let's think of this in a very optimistic way, right? Let's pretend that the insurance came back and it was a 0% increase because a company wants to buy our business from us and give us a really low increase. Our insurance consultant will probably say, don't take it because you're going to be deep water later on down the road. It would take a whole nother slide for me to explain how insurance works to you, and even that would just make your head spin about how they calculate what they recommend, that's why we have a consultant that tells us these things. But let's say that happened. Or let's say this legislative session, the legislatures got together and said, we know everybody's facing with a cliff, we're going to give everybody a supplement to their ECS grant. And let's say we found ourselves in a position where, as a function of revenue or the drivers, we were $500,000 to the benefit, right? What would my recommendations be? Well, yes, of course I would say let's keep that ELL teacher at full time, or let's only reduce the library media specialist 0.5 or some combination. I don't like these, right? But I know there would also be folks who would think, well, you're asking for 4.8%, Charles, or Board of Education, should you adopt that recommendation, that too is a lot. Would we want to move that closer or below 4%? Right? These are the difficult things. What I've tried to do with this budget is strike a balance between what we need to reduce to come in to get us from that 12.7% down to where we are now. But I'm also a realist, and I know 4.8 is a big lift. It's a huge ask for this community. I get it, and this what I've tried to get us to is this place in a very complicated year.
Yeah, agreed. Okay.
You handed out this other document here. It's not labeled. Is this the amounts that were
cut? So
these are actually
reductions.
negatives?
yeah, no, those
Cuts.
were, so we cut 20% from all of the building budgets.
So this is the 20%.
Those are the cuts. Yeah, I'm sure you would be curious. As part of that 20% reduction at Valley View, Gildersleeve, Brownstone from Bob, what were those things that were cut? Those were the things that were pulled out of the request.
Gotcha. I just I think I just need to kind of process this with us all, what is happening with our student services, our special education budget, because I think what we've been seeing over the last 2 years is not normal. Like, that has not been our normal trend. This current year's budget is included a student services increase of what, $520,000-ish, and this budget is asking for an additional $640,000+. That's doubling our student services budget over the course of 2 years.
Yes.
My understanding is that we are seeing this in districts across the state, correct? That we are not alone in this.
Can we put Dawn back up?
I guess what I'm asking, what I'm curious about is this, are we seeing this as a direct reflection of what we've been experiencing over the last several years? Is this a trend we expect to continue indefinitely? How is any district meant to sustain that kind of increase in need long term? I mean, am I correct, Dawn, that this is not seeing our budget needs, our special education needs double over the course of 2 years? That's not a trend that we've seen historically in Portland.
No, but there's been a steady increase every year. I mean, this is my 7th budget building season, and it's been a steady increase every year, not doubling every year. Yeah. And Dave brought up a really good example of the transportation. Our transportation costs are through the roof. That is a big driver for our for our budget.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It is, it's ridiculous.
But you said other towns are seeing similar kind of increases, or do you don't know?
No, everybody.
Yes. Yes, because other towns are, I mean, the other piece to that too, besides speaking with colleagues and, at opportunities for us to be together, it's the combination of that, and we're all using the same agencies.
Yeah.
And, we do as much as we can ride sharing and, using a van from a regional town to, pick up kids in each town and then go to a certain school. We're trying all of that, but it's still, the costs are through the roof.
So Dawn, without, getting into specific students, can you talk to that? Have you been successful this current year? Are there students that are doing a ride share situation? Because that was going to be a recommendation I had, a question I have about, are we trying to consolidate with East Hampton or Cromwell, or surrounding towns and sharing to specific schools?
Oh, yeah, all of our kids, with the exception of a couple of kids that need their own independent transportation, or because it's part of their IEP, because it's part of their social emotional needs, all of our kids are in rideshare situations. Nobody's on their own individual van. And the companies that we work with, like M&J, like Access Transportation, they all are giving us the rate of, a shared van.
I guess, I don't know what I'm asking for specifically, except to just acknowledge that this is, yes, we must meet student need, and also, yes, this is not sustainable. Individual districts can't sustain this kind of increase in need year after year, and I guess what should we be doing to try and make that clearer to the folks who hold the purse strings, that excess cost isn't cutting it when our district is seeing our needs double over the course of 2 years. Excess cost isn't cutting it.
I mean, I participate in the Connecticut Special Ed Administrators Group, and they're lobbying with the state and the feds over the excess cost reimbursement, IDEA funding, all of that in order to, because that's the problem, is we're all bearing the brunt of this outrageous cost increase.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the funding source is not increasing, in concert with that. So it's direct hits to the districts right now.
Yeah, and I know that this isn't the best answer, Laura, but I would just say with Dawn here too, one of the things we have done is build the in-house program,
which is incredible.
Right.
Our in-house programs are incredible, and and Dawn, you have our gratitude for the work that you've done to create these programs, because I can't even imagine what we would be facing if we weren't able to serve as many students in district as we are able to serve. That is, I think, one of the best decisions that has come out of the last several years to support creating that programming.
Yeah, and other part of it, in addition to special ed, and Stephanie can tell you, I know we're talking about a 4.8% increase, but if I think about it in this context, what could you buy last year this time that doesn't cost 4.8% more now?
Yeah, but Charles, we're not talking just about a 4.8 increase. We're talking about a 4.8% increase with significant cuts.
Yes.
To our staffing and our programming in district, right?
That's a great point. Yep.
It's not.
It's 12.7.
It's not fair to say what Yes.
It's
exactly.
a 12.7. That's the reality. Or really closer to 10 at minimum to maintain.
Yep.
Right. Laura, I really appreciate you made that point, because we are sacrificing, if that's how we want to think of it. I don't like that word. We are adjusting for special education needs on the back of some regular education programming. That is a fair point to make.
I do have some general kind of all over the place questions that just for clarification, that I do feel like with so many cuts being made, I need to ask to have clarification, understanding. Have we looked under every rock? Have we really looked at places we can save a penny here, a penny there, and make that add up to part of a position, something like that. So do you want to get into this now? Should I save this for the next evening?
I mean, I'll point out it's 9:18. We've been going hard for 2 hours now. We do have Thursday night. I really appreciate, and I think it's a great way to answer some of these questions. What we've done with the email me the questions, and I will respond to the whole board. And then what I will do for the community too. I've been putting them all in the Google Doc. I will make, I believe in complete transparency. To save some time if you're asking the questions and I'm answering to the full board in writing, I'll make sure that Google Doc and all of those questions are available to anybody. And they would be anyway if we ever got an FOI, but I won't make people file an FOI. I'll share the questions that Sarah and Tim asked. I think they're great questions and deserve that. It might just keep us from being here until 11 o'clock tonight and again until 11 o'clock on Thursday night, but I want to make sure you have all of the information you need, and I know I'm presenting you with some almost impossible choices here, and I'm sorry for that. I don't know what else to do.
There's no need to apologize, I'm sure this keeps you up at night, but honestly, we know that we have not been foolishly spending money in the last 3 years since COVID with all of the extra money that we got. We did it in a diligent and a thoughtful, and I think what we're seeing is the after effects of COVID with the mental health part of it, the special ed part of it, and I hope it's not a trend that's going to continue, but for the time being, it is, and we knew this was going to happen, not to the significant way that it did, but this gives us a chance to think about the next 10 years and the facilities plans that we have. As you said, this kind of puts us in a position to think about what the costs are of operating 3 elementary schools with declining numbers.
And I'm really glad you said that, because I haven't gotten, I was maybe do this Thursday, the capital improvement side of this needs to also be presented. And as we get to the capital improvement and this one, it is essential that people are aware of this as we head into next Wednesday when Great Blue is going to share the survey results. A lot of the expenses nested within this, I'm just going to be completely honest again, are a function of running 3 small elementary schools. You can't divide people in half, right? You need people to run the schools and then pay the overhead and upkeep and maintenance of them. And as we know from our Fryer and Sightlines analysis, they're crumbling, and they need. Bob will tell you, he's here, worried tonight about what Valley View is going to look like after the rainstorm this evening.
I know.
We are at a critical place. And one of the ways that we're gonna have to do this is if we get to that consolidation, we will reset the baseline FTE, which will help us short-term and long-term with the 10 and 12% insurance premium increases, right? I mean, with the salary and step increases. This is, it's time. It's time for Portland to look at these numbers, be concerned, be alarmed, and then have an honest discussion about what's driving some of those costs where you're educating 1,200 students in 5 buildings.
Yeah, no, good point.
So, Kim, you have additional questions. I'm sure lots of us have additional questions. Does it seem like a good plan to everybody to, between now and Thursday, if you're able, email additional questions to Charles? We can pick up kind of where we've left off on Thursday. Does that seem like a good plan?
I think that's a good point.
Yeah? It is Stacy's birthday. We do want to get her out of here before it's no longer your birthday.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
So
Make a motion to adjourn?
Well, not quite yet. Hold on, we have a few more agenda items to get through, or at least one. Hang on. But if that sounds okay to everybody, that will be the plan then, that we will pause, we will pick up this conversation on Thursday. The meeting will be here again. We will get the agenda cleaned up so that it doesn't say Buck Foreman room. We are going to move on to public comments. Do we have anyone online who wishes to address the board at this point?
No one's messaged yet. We should probably give it a minute.
Give it a couple seconds.
I actually like this arrangement of tables, by the way, and I think we look pretty good. I mean, we can all see each other and we can all be seen, so this arrangement looks pretty good.
Anybody wishing to address the board at this point?
Not yet.
No? Okay. Then I believe there'll be additional opportunities on Thursday if folks want to tune in and comment then. We are not going to take any action at this time. So, Meg, would you like to make a motion to adjourn?
I would love to make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Stacy. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Happy birthday.